귀한 자리에 함께해 주신 여러분께 진심으로 감사를 드립니다. 우리 먼저 이런 행사를 열 수 있도록 은혜 베풀어 주신 우리 하나님께 박수로 한번 영광 돌리고 시작하면 좋겠습니다. 남가주교회협의회에서 마련한 샘 라이너 목사님 초청 세미나에 앞서서 우리 이제 오늘 장장 4시간에 왔어. 그리고 뒷분들하고도요. 이제 여기서 뵈니 더 반갑습니다. 인사 나누실까요? 여기서 뵈니 더 반갑습니다. 인사 나누시죠. 저는 오늘 진행은 그렇게 많지 않습니다. 그래도 진행을 맡게 되어서 먼저 소개를 드리겠습니다. 저는 송금관 목사로 남가주교회협의회에서 회장으로 섬기고 있습니다. 감사합니다.
My name is 금관.
남가주교회협의회 56대 회장으로 섬기고 계시는 김은목목사님 나오셔서 오늘 환영 인사해 주도록 하겠습니다.
금번 세미나를 계획할 수 있게 해주시고 또 준비하고 이렇게 열 수 있도록 섭리해 주신 성삼위 하나님 앞에 모든 영광을 돌려드립니다. 어떻게 보면 선교지보다도 더 선교지 같은 이민 목회 현장에서 고군분투하시며 복음을 위해 교회를 섬기시는 가운데 시간을 내어주셔서 참석해 주신 목사님들 그리고 사역자들, 동역자들께 깊은 감사를 드립니다. 또한 세미나를 위해서 물심양면으로 관심과 후원을 아끼지 않으신 목사님들과 교회 그리고 저희 초청에 기쁨으로 응해주시고 미주한인교회에 관심을 가져주시고 강사로 와서 섬겨주시는 우리 샘 라이너 목사님께 감사를 드립니다. 환영사는 책자 안에 간단하게 제가 썼습니다. 부족하지만 한번 읽어주시기 바랍니다.
The welcoming remarks are in the textbook that we handed out.
근본 세미나가 많은 분들이 배가 기울어지고 있다라고 하지만 그런 가운데서도 이 세상의 소망은 주님의 교회라는 그런 소망으로 다시 한번 이라는 구호를 외칠 수 있는 그런 기회가 되기를 바라면서 여러분을 진심으로 환영합니다.
Personally, I believe that among the numerous themes there is in the Bible, and today it seems like the boats are being turned over, but we are so happy to hope to see that.
감사합니다.
Thank you.
네, 충현선교교회를 담임하고 계시고 이제 우리 다음 세대를 좀 기대할 수 있도록 만드시는 목사님도 오늘 또 참석을 해주셨습니다. 충현선교교회 구김경 목사님 나오셔서 시작기도 해주시겠습니다.
함께 기도하겠습니다. 하나님 아버지, 오늘 남가주기독교교회협의회가 주관하는 세미나의 기회를 인도해 주셔서 감사합니다. Gracious Heavenly Father, thank you for guiding us to this seminar hosted by Southern California Council of Christian Churches. 이 시간 샘 라이너 목사님을 통해 진단과 미래라는 주제로 말씀을 나눌 때 우리 교회 현재를 진리의 말씀 앞에 정직하게 진단하고 주님이 기뻐하시는 미래를 향해 나아갈 지혜를 허락하여 주옵소서. As you listen to Pastor Sam Rainer share on the theme of diagnosis and future, grant us the wisdom to honestly evaluate the current state of our churches and to clearly envision the future you desire for us. Empower Pastor Rainer with your Holy Spirit as he speaks, and may this gathering be a powerful starting point for spiritual renewal and growth for all the churches in Southern California. 말씀을 전하시는 목사님께 성령의 능력을 더해 주시고 이 몸이 남가주 지역 모든 교회들의 영적 회복과 도입의 출발점이 될 수 있도록 주 우리 가운데 인도하시고 역사하여 주옵소서. 예수 그리스도의 이름으로 기도드립니다.
먼저 강사 목사님 모시기 전에요 몇 가지만 말씀을 드리도록 하겠습니다. 오늘 강의 순서는요, 여러분들 책자 뒤쪽에 한 장을 넘겨주시면 거의 맨 뒤에 표지에 순서가 적혀 있습니다. 네, 이제 그럼 샘 라이너 목사님, Church Answers 대표로 계신 샘 라이너 목사님을 모실 텐데요. 저희들 힘차게 한번 오늘 격려 박수로 환영해 주시면 감사하겠습니다.
Let's give a round of applause to our guest speaker, Sam Rainer, Reverend Sam Rainer.
오늘 저희들이 선물을 좀 준비했으면 좋겠는데 못했지만 꽃다발로 환영 대신하도록 하겠습니다.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow. Thank you. Thank you. It is my honor
to be with you this morning in beautiful Los Angeles, here in Koreatown. This is my first time in Koreatown, and I am excited to see everything, to see you, and to experience everything that is here. We are going to have 4 sessions together, and we're going to begin by talking about some trends that really affect everyone, all churches in the United States. We're then going to, in the next session, talk about an expectation of growth and how you can create this expectation of growth in your church. In our 3rd session, we'll be discussing more specifics about Korean American churches. And in the last session, artificial intelligence is what we're going to be talking about. And I am curious to see if this translation system works.
It's working right now.
Is it working?
Yeah, I'm trying to make it work.
Oh, that's great. So in my church, we have 30 nationalities and 2 main languages, English and Spanish. So I am very curious to see how this works, because if it does, I would like to use it in my church. So the first session is all about trends that can make or break your next 10 years. By the way, there are detailed notes in your little booklet. I will follow very closely to those notes. So if you want to kind of open your booklet and see that, a lot of what I say will also be there. So let me explain. What do I mean by a church on the brink? What do I mean by that? Well, I have pastored that church. Maybe you are pastoring that church. My first church was a mega church of 6 people. It was in a rural part of Kentucky. Anyone in here been to Kentucky? Okay, there's a few. I'm a city boy. I grew up mainly in cities, but God called me to my first church, which was 2 hours away, into the middle of Kentucky. Now, it's where my wife was from, so she could translate for me from city to country. It was still English, but very different languages. They had just gotten rid of the outhouse. Does that translate? Does outhouse translate? You guys know what I'm talking about? An outhouse? An outdoor bathroom? No running water? So it was very rural. And we had more problems than people. We had no money, and we had no air conditioning, which is a real problem in August in the middle of Kentucky. But God worked, and that tiny church of 6 people grew to 40 people. And that was a big blessing, because I had no idea what I was doing as a 24-year-old pastor. The only reason they hired me is because God knew there was no way I was going to mess this church up. They were already that far gone. Here's the point that I want to make. If God can save any person, He can save any church. I truly believe that God is powerful enough to save any person, and if that is the case, then there is no church too far gone that God cannot bring back. And He will do it for His glory. So my job at that church, Union Band Baptist Church, my job at that church was to bring them back from the brink. They were at the edge. They were ready to go over the edge. They hadn't even had services in 2 years. And God allowed me, as an inexperienced 24-year-old pastor, to help them. And you know what? They helped me too. They helped me grow. They helped me learn. So I was never going to take them to grand heights. It was a community of only 500 people. They were never going to be a mega church. even if they reached everyone in the community. But I was able to get them to a place healthy enough to where they were doing ministry. And it was 2 years of my life that I do not regret. I loved my time at Union Band Baptist Church.
When I think of what is going to drive all of these sessions, it's two things. I firmly believe that no church should die, and every church can grow. I don't like to hear about churches dying. Some will, unfortunately. Some churches will die, but I don't think any church should die. And I think that every church should grow. Those are two principles that will drive everything that I say today. Every church is worth your effort. Any church is worth your effort. Because God can be glorified in any work of ministry. And I believe that any church can experience a turnaround. Now here's the problem. So let's talk about some trends. Here's the problem. Approximately 80% of churches are plateauing or declining. So church decline in North America is a systemic problem. It's everywhere. It's in LA. It's in Florida, where I live now. It's in Kentucky. It's in New York. It's everywhere. All regions, all cultures are in North America are experiencing a decline in the church. Now here's the thing about struggling churches. Struggling churches are simultaneously fragile and resilient. And what I mean by fragile is like it's almost like every weekend, every Sunday can feel like it's the last one. And yet, churches survive week after week, month after month, year after year. I like to think that these churches are hanging on by their fingernails, but they're really strong fingernails. Why is my church not growing? That's a question that often gets asked. It was a question I asked when I was pastoring in Kentucky with 6 people. What is wrong? So we've got to first get out of the denial phase. We have to recognize the problem. Let me tell you a story about a consultation that I did a few years ago in the Midwest of the United States. So I went to this church and I was talking with the elders. They had just woken up from a 40-year slumber. Well, it was 30 years of decline. Every single year. 30 straight years. And they averaged losing about 8 people per year. So that's what, 240 people that they had lost over 30 years. They had declined from 400 in average attendance, which is a very large church, to 160. Now, if you are a church of 400 people, do you notice a loss of 8 people in a given year? Probably not. Right? You probably don't notice that. You probably don't notice it for 7 years. They didn't notice it for 30 years. And so I came to them and I reported back to them their own numbers. So they'd given me all of their numbers and I just plotted it out on a chart. And I showed them, you have declined about 8 people per year for 30 years. And you know what they told me? We don't believe you. And I told them, they are your numbers. They're what you reported to me. And then I really had to push into them pretty hard because they thought that it was their new young pastor, that he was to blame. This young guy that had come in and had messed everything up. He was in his 20s, and I looked at their elders, and I said this with as much love as I could. I said, your problem has existed longer than your pastor has been alive. 30 years. He's not even 30 years old. There were 8 of them. There were 8 elders who had been there a very long time. And I told them, if you had just each one person for Christ each year, your church wouldn't have declined. 8 of you could have stopped the church from declining, because guess what? You lost, on average, 8 people per year. So this is a systemic problem. This is not just a Korean church problem. This is an American problem. This is all of us, my church included. We have to do the work of evangelism. Now here's another trend. So the trend is that far too few churches are growing. But another trend is, so why? Well, here's why. Only 1% of churches have an ongoing evangelism emphasis. Only 1%. Now, some will do evangelistic events. Some will have a couple of times a year where they'll do something and invite their friends or reach out into the community. But an ongoing emphasis, only 1%. How did the North American church lose its motivation for outreach? Well, lack of obedience is number one. Lack of obedience. A lot of churches relied on transfer growth, especially in the 1980s and 1990s and into the 2000s. And it just, hey, people are coming in, so we're okay. Well, they weren't, because they weren't doing the work of evangelism. So a lack of obedience. There was a lack of strategy. And I don't know about your church, but in the 1980s, 90s, and early 2000s, the evangelical church had a lot of outreach programs. Some worked better than others, but we had a lot of outreach programs. Well, the ones that didn't work, we canceled. And maybe they needed to be canceled. But we didn't replace them with anything. So I want you to think about this. So I'm 46 years old. I don't know if that's young or old to you. My kids think I'm really, really old. You may think I'm young. I don't know. I'm kind of right there in that middle-age category. I am the oldest of millennials. I'm just barely a millennial. Almost Gen X. So, my church canceled all these outreach programs that we used to have. Grow, Faith, there was others. Maybe you've used some of them. And again, some worked better than others, but we canceled them. I grew up as a millennial in a church, and I was never once trained in the work of evangelism. We have a whole generation of people, millennials, that for the most part were never taught how to do evangelism. We wonder why our churches today don't do the work of evangelism, is because we were never taught. So a lack of strategy, lack of obedience, lack of strategy, a lack of focus. Churches tend to fight a little bit. Don't know if you know that. Denominations can have their battles as well. And it distracts us. It distracts us from the Great Commission. And we lack urgency. We have relied on institutional givers, and praise God, people give. Oh my goodness, praise God that people give. But we have relied on them to just kind of keep things going, even as churches decline. So, what is going to help us define the next 10 years? What are some trends that will help? What are some ways that we can navigate these trends? Well, let's work through some of this. So a typical church will lose about 20% of its attendance every year. Now, if you are smaller, that percentage will be smaller. But, a church of 200 can expect to lose about, 40 people per year, approximately. And obviously, the larger the church, the more this number applies. Let me walk you through this. So let's just look at a church of 100. Let's just look at a church of 100. you'll lose, so if you're a church of 100, you're going to lose one person to death. That's the death rate in the United States. That's approximate. It's unfortunate that people do pass away. So you're going to lose one to death. The mobility rate in the United States is about 9%. So you can lose another 9, just they move. So now you're at 10 if you're a church of 100. About 5 will transfer out of your church. And another 5 or 10 will just stop coming as frequently. And as they decline in their frequency of attendance, that affects your attendance as well. So you're going to lose about 20% of your attendance each year to death, people moving, people transferring, and then people just not coming as often. So what this means is that even if your church is plateaued, let's say you have the same attendance year after year, you're still bringing in new people because others are leaving. So the first thing to do if you are in a church that's struggling is to see if you can just get to the point to where you are plateaued, because that does mean that new people are coming in. But I wanted to find some growth terms, because we talk about church growth. There's only 4 ways statistically that a church can grow. Spiritually, a church needs to grow in many, many, many ways, but I'm just going to talk about numbers, the statistics here. So there's only 4 ways statistically that a church can grow. The first one is the most important one: conversion growth, which means somebody came to know Jesus, they were assimilated into the church, and now they are being discipled. So this person didn't know Jesus before, and now they know Jesus because somebody shared Christ with them, and now they're being discipled in the church. And in many churches, at my church, they're going to be baptized as well. So that's conversion growth. That's one way a church grows. Obviously, the most important way, that's the work of evangelism. But there's also biological growth. That occurs when children are born, they're fostered, they're adopted. So my family's a foster family. I have an adopted son. I have a multi-ethnic family myself, because my son is black. So let's not forget, it's not just people having babies, which is very important. It's also fostering children, adopting children. And so biological growth means that we're having babies and children in the church, however they come into the church, and they are raised in the congregation, and we retain them. We keep our own children. That's very important. So that would be the second most important way a church can grow. A third way that the church can grow is with new people to the community. We have a lot of people moving into Florida. We have all sorts of new people. We're crazy in Florida. I don't know if you've heard that. We're kind of crazy down there. And I love it. I fit right in. I fit right in my culture. And people come and they look for a church. Well, that's demographic growth. I'm new to the community. I'm looking for a church. And then the last way a church can grow, and this is the least important way, is transfer growth, which means I was in a church down the road, and now I'm here. So it's not like I moved into a new community. I just transferred from one church to another in the same community. Now, there are times that people need to transfer, of course. There are good reasons for transfer growth. But it is the least important of the 4. Guess which one has driven most of church growth the last 40 or 50 years? Transfer growth. Transfer growth. So, let's walk through this. Let's obviously conversion growth is the most important. Let's talk about biological growth. The median age of a churchgoer is 60 years old. The median age in the United States is 39, which means that the church, just in general, the church is about a generation older than the community. If you look at just any church in any community, most are a generation older, 20 years, than the surrounding community. Fertility rates are way down. In the 1950s, there were about 3.5 children born per woman. the replacement rate of a society is 2.1 children per woman. The birth rate in the United States right now is 1.6, and in the Asian American community, it's 1.5. So we are not having enough babies to balance out the future population. Without immigration, our nation will decline. Now, I know that immigration is a very controversial subject in the United States, but that's just the facts. If we do not have more people immigrating to this nation, we will enter into a pretty serious decline, which obviously has impact on the church. We're not doing conversion growth either, as I've mentioned. We're not seeing biological growth like in the past. And demographic growth. People are moving far less than they ever have. Since we've been counting, since the U.S. government has been counting how people move, we are at the lowest point since the 1940s. Most people think that these young people, they move around a lot. They don't. Millennials do not move. Gen Z does not move. Why? Anybody know? They can't afford homes. A lot of families are two-income homes. So if one mom gets a job or dad, the other one has to get a new job too. So people are moving less, which means that if you reach young people in your community, you are likely to keep them because they're not moving nearly as much. So here's what's happened. Again, we're just talking trends in this first session. We're going to take a deeper dive in the next few sessions. In the last 25 years, the median church size has dropped in half. What it was is about 137 in the year 2000, and today it's 70. So the typical church is half the size that it was roughly 25 years ago. You can see the trend is not a good one. Now, I don't think we're at a crisis moment, and frankly, a church of 70 people can do a lot of good, a ton of good. A church of 20 people can do an amazing work. So I don't think that we are at a crisis. I just want to point out the trend, that it's not moving in the right direction. So let's talk about the people that we're supposed to reach. Let's talk about those that don't go to church. The unchurched in America, we did a big study at Church Answers, big national study, cost me way too much money, and then we gave it away. You can actually find the study at churchanswers.com. It is in English. I do apologize. We should have translated it in Korean, but you can find it there at churchanswers.com. It should just be a pop-up on your screen if you want to go look at the study. And I'm just going to summarize it for you here in this session. So we did this big national study on the unchurched, and we found some things. Here's what we found. That unchurched does not mean unfamiliar. Roughly 60% of the unchurched said that they had some church background. Maybe they had gone as a kid, maybe vacation Bible school, something like that. They had attended church regularly as a child, at some point in their childhood. So a lot of people who are unchurched, the majority of those who are unchurched, 60%, have some connection to the church. This is the case of the Korean American community as well. And when we get into session 3, I'll talk about that some. So one thing that we found is that a lot of people who don't go to church at least have some connection to the church. It may have been way in their past, but there is some connection. Here's what else we found. When you talk to the unchurched, nearly 6 out of 10 of them believe that the church is good for their community. You ask an unchurched person, the majority of them will tell you, yes, churches, I think the concept of church is good for the community. So a lot of people are not even hostile. They may be cautious, they may be indifferent or disconnected, but they still believe that the church can be a force for good in their community. So there is some connection with the unchurched. Most of them would say that churches are good. Now here's the problem. Here's what we found. only 38% of the unchurched viewed their local churches favorably. So they will tell you, yes, the concept of church is good. Communities need churches. But then when you talk about churches in their area, there's less of a favorability with that. They have a low trust level of the churches right around them. So the unchurched want to like the church. They want to believe that it's good, but they do not see that in the churches in their area. Now, I think this is a great opportunity for us as pastors. I think it's a great opportunity for us as churches. Now, here was the big surprise in the study. This I had to double and triple check over and over again. Are these numbers right? Well, they are. So the unchurched actually view the church as more relevant today than churchgoers do. So when you ask an unchurched person, they will have a higher view of the relevancy of the church than people who actually go to church. That was fascinating to me. About 40% of churchgoers said that the church is irrelevant. But only 27% of the unchurched felt the same. So here is the summary. Church people are saying, I trust my church, I love my church, I just don't believe it's relevant. I think it's irrelevant today. But the unchurched are saying, no, the church is still relevant, I just don't know that I can trust it. This may be one of the biggest opportunities that we've seen in a long time. The unchurched, some are hostile. Some people who don't go to church or have a Christian connection, some are hostile. Yes, I realize that. But the majority are not. So, your church was placed where it is for a reason. Your church address is not an accident. Here's what I want you to do. Get your phones out. And if you don't have your phone, that's fine. If you don't want to get out your phone, that's okay. But I want you to just look up your address. Look at your neighborhood. I want you to just, if you want to just visualize it, but just pull it up on your phone. Put your address in. And just look at where you are. Look at where your church is. Your church is exactly where God wants it. God put you there for a reason. God ordained you. It was His sovereign hand for you to be there. And I believe that my church's address is 1305 43rd Street West in Bradenton, Florida. I love my location. I love my church. My community is about 55% white and about 45% ethnic minority. 43% of the population of my neighborhood are under 40. And there are about 250,000 people in my neighborhood that can just drive to my church. There are plenty of people to reach where I am. There are plenty of people to reach where you are. And what God began at my church's location in 1956 is not supposed to stop until Jesus returns. And what God began at your location with your church is not supposed to stop until Jesus returns. How do we know when we're supposed to stop? It's when the good Lord returns. And until then, we're going to keep doing gospel work. I believe that God can take your church and reach the neighborhood. Now, it will grow as fast as He wants it, and not every church grows the same, and I know that. That is the Lord's work. But I do believe that He can use you, and you should believe the same thing. Keep doing gospel work, and I do believe that God will bless. I'll take some questions now.
우리 첫 번째 강의를 마쳤는데요. 샘라이 목사님께 다시 한번 크게 박수 부탁드립니다. 여러 가지 미리 친구가 대단한 시를 주신 것 같습니다. 저도 제 교회가 위치가 너무 안 좋다, 참 안 좋다 이런 생각을 은연중에 많이 갖고 있었는데 위치가 문제가 아닌 것 같습니다. 그리고 전도에 대한 의식이 결핍이었다는 거 오늘 다시 한번 느끼게 아마 이 질문 주신 것 외에도 아마 질문을 하고 싶어 하시는 분들이 아마 강의를 들으시면서 있으실 것 같습니다. 나는 꼭 질문을 하겠다 그러시는 분들은 미리 나눠드린 그 종이에 적으셔서 이렇게 진행요원이 있으시면 다니실 때 주시든가 아니면 뒤로 설명하셔서 전달해 주시면 감사하겠습니다. 질문을 4분이 주셨는데요. 성리교회 배종환 담임 목사님께서 질문하신 거가 이제 주목이 됐어요. 예수생명팀교회 조중석 목사님께서 질문하신 것이 있습니다.
How did you recover from the crisis? Did you recover from any crises that you personally experienced at your church? And do you have a diagnosis of the problems facing Korean immigrant churches? And I guess any strategies for immigrant recovery? I don't know.
지금 조주성 목사님께서 하신 거 하셨죠? 예, 자신이 겪은 위기를 어떻게 회복했나? 한국 예민교회 문제 진단과 새로운 회복을 위한 전략이 있는가에 대해서.
I have experienced many crises in my life, personal, church, and it would take me the rest of 3 sessions to go over that. Do you want me to wait just a second? We good? Okay. I have been through many crises in my life, and personal and with the church. It would take me several days with you to go over all of them. But I have experienced the true front lines of spiritual warfare in some very dark ways. But God is good and He has gotten me through all of them. And I know that many of you could probably share similar stories as mine. That being said, I would say one of the biggest challenges at our church was transitioning from an older church to a church that serves younger families without neglecting our older generation. It also meant that we had to become more diverse as a church because we were largely a white church when I got there in a community that's about half white. So thankfully, my people were willing to change and to move in the direction that we needed to. It wasn't the smoothest of roads the entire trip, but we did get there. I will say this, and I'm going to talk about this in a future session. You've got to get your people to a place where they're willing to do the things that they need to do. Otherwise, you're just going to be fighting your own people, and you don't want to fight your own people. I did not myself want to be the wedge in my church. So I had some work to do to bring some people along culturally, at least in terms of reaching the next generation. And we did that. And now, 11 years later, I have some of these older folks coming up to me, and they will say, well, if you're a pastor, there are 2 phrases you will never hear. I'm sorry, and you were right. No one ever apologizes to the pastor. No one ever admits they were wrong to the pastor. But in essence, that's what they told me. They've said, we love what's happening now. We get it. We understand. But it took time. So I could get into some real specifics here. But I will talk more generally because some of the stories that I've had to experience with tragedy and things like that are very, very difficult. But God was good to get me through all of them. Thank you.
네, 고맙습니다. 2번째 질문은 브릿지교회 김상훈 부목사님께서 해주셨습니다. 앞으로 시대는 지금까지 교회들이 운영하던 방식들이 변화되어야 할 것인데 어떤 변화가 필요한지.
In the coming era, the ways churches need to operate will have to change. And for you personally, what kind of changes do you think are necessary? And in what ways do small churches need to unite for survival to survive together? And are there any changes or preparations or efforts that you might recommend in that process?
Yes, you have to build. You want your church to be built into the rhythm of your people. So for us, what that means is Sunday morning and Wednesday night, Sunday morning and Wednesday night, Sunday morning and Wednesday night, year round. What we've done is we've created a culture in our church that if it's Sunday morning, you're at the church. If it's Wednesday night, you're at the church. You are likely only going to get 2 time slots out of your people a week, regular, in a regular rhythm. But if you can get to the point to where the church is built into the rhythm of your people and the way that the school system is with your families, guess what? Kids got to go to school every day. And if they don't, you're going to get a phone call from the school. Well, why wouldn't church act the same way? You sign up to play on the baseball team, and you don't show up to practice. You're going to get a call from the coach. Hey, you playing or not? So one of the things that we've done to get younger as a church and to implement the change that we needed to implement was simply to get people coming more regularly. And that's not easy, but everything we do at our church for the most part is Sunday morning, Wednesday night, Sunday morning, Wednesday night. And that rhythm, now your rhythm may be different. You may pick different times and days and different ways. But it is very important to your people that they know where they're supposed to be at a specific time. And that will help you. The more people that are there more often, the easier the task you will have.
네, 감사합니다. 땡큐. 한 가지 질문이 더 있습니다. 미주 크리스천 신문의 박준호 기자님께서 질문하셨습니다. 아까 그 강의 내용 중에 답이 있을 줄로 아는데요. 한국 교회는 90년대 이전까지 교회가 세상을 앞서갔다고 생각하지만 90년대 이후 교회가 세상의 변화에 뒤처지게 되었습니다. 미주한인교회는 이민 역사와 함께했고 한인들의 구심점 역할을 해왔습니다. 하지만 어느 순간 이러한 모습은 점점 사라지게 되었고 교인 감소 현상이 발생하게 되었습니다. 특히 2015년 이후 한국교회는 감소 추세를 보였으며 팬데믹이 이를 가속화했다고 봅니다. 미국 교회와 마찬가지로 한인교회도 대형 교회 및 몇 곳을 제외하면 50명 이하의 소형 교회가 대다수입니다. 이런 소형 교회 목회자들이 향후 10년을 좌우할 핵심 흐름 속에서 어떻게 대처해야 할까요? 특히 반드시 해야 하는 핵심 대처 전략이 있다면 무엇이라고 보십니까?
I believe before the 1990s, Korean churches and churches in general were kind of ahead of the curve. But then after the 1990s, churches began to fall behind kind of how the world was changing. And historically, immigrant churches, especially Korean ones, in the United States have grown with the history of immigration. And they served as an essential gathering place for immigrants. But at some point, especially after 2015, I think the role has gradually began to decline, and the pandemic accelerated those trends, in this person's opinion. And so, right now, most Korean churches, like American churches, except for a few large mega churches, they're small churches, like you said, with fewer than 50, 70 people. So how should pastors of these small churches respond to key trends in the next 10 years and anything that you see as essential?
Great question, and I agree with the premise. I agree with the premise of what's being said. I do think things are different, and I do think that a lot of churches have fallen behind since the 1990s. In fact, I'm doing a webinar here this month in June on that, on the whole thing, like what happened in the 1990s. So, whoever brought the question it's an appropriate question. If you are a small church, let's say 50 people. Now, if you were to tell somebody that you're in a management position and that you oversee 50 people, most people would go, whoa, yeah, that's a big job, right? So let's just recognize that even the small church, quote unquote small church, is a big job. You are having to shepherd and manage dozens of people, and at that size, typically you don't have a whole lot of help. So what you need to do is you need to break things down into steps that are actionable for you. So I'm a pastor of a church of 50 people. I want to grow by 10% next year. Okay, great. I know I'm going to lose some in the process, some maybe. So I need to reach 10. I need to go reach 10 people to account for some losses and then some growth. Well, that could be 2 or 3 families. So now you go, okay, 3 families. I want to reach 3 families to bring them into my church. That's 1 every 4 months. Now we're starting to think about things in a way that are actionable and reasonable. It is unreasonable to think that every church of 50 people can grow to 500 in a couple of years. I wish I had that formula. I would sell a lot more books, but it's just hard to grow that fast. So if you are smaller, 50 people or whatever, think like that. Okay, I want to bring in 10 new people, 3 or 4 new families, 1 every 3 or 4 months. That's reasonable and doable. And oh, by the way, if you recruit someone to do it with you, and you're not just doing all the work yourself, take that 10 and it's now 20. So work with the willing. I'm going to give a whole presentation on this in one of the future sessions. Work with those who will work with you. Not everyone's going to get it, and that's okay. But those who are willing to work with you, work with them. And if you're 50 people, go get 10 more. You may grow by about 10% or so. So I would say just breaking it down to those actionable steps. You don't need to think like a church of 500. I mean, if you have that big vision, great. But you got to get there. How are you going to get there? Incremental steps.
네, 질문하신 분들의 충분한 답이 되셨을 것 같습니다. 우리 다시 한번 박수로 고맙습니다.